agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by Justin Holmes, a professor of political science at the University of Northern Iowa, for this supporters-exclusive midweek show where we go through ideologies. And this week, Justin, environmentalism. Welcome.
Good to be here.
You know, it's fun. This will be the second series where we're getting closer and closer to finishing our ideologies, of course.
Whatever will we do with ourselves after this?
Well, we're political scientists. There's always something.
There's always something.
There's always something. But it's been a lot of fun. It's always fun to kind of go through. I think that's one of the fun things about being a professor is we have these things and we go through them and we get to experience them with students and they get to have these moments and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of that I don't like about these news cycles, right? It's this constant churn, whereas I want to be thinking
crazy.
My heavens, yeah, it's just, it's never ending. So here we get to kind of see something and move through with it. And we had moved through the classical ideologies, right? So things like liberalism and conservatism. And we looked at that because many of them early on are addressing or dealing with the Enlightenment in some way. And then we've now been in the more modern ideologies, and they kind of start to transcend or move away from those Enlightenment questions. And environmentalism is going to be another one of those. And it's a little weird one when you have it on the syllabus or when you're talking with students about it or parents will bring it up, they're like, well, environmentalism is not an ideology. And the answer is, well, yes, but no.
I was going to say, when you threw this one out to me, I was like, what the heck?
Right. Because there's two different elements, right? There's environmentalism, kind of the managerial issue, right? It's right.
Like I recycle, I drive a Prius.
Yeah, and it oftentimes gets embedded inside of other ideologies, right? So there can be, in fact, like liberal environmentalists, right? And that's not a contradiction of terms. However, it's when you start to move to what's called ecologism that you get to what we think of as being a unique political environmental ideology. As a matter of fact, as Andrew Dobson has argued, it's an ideology that demands a fundamental rethinking of humanity's relationship to the world. And that, again, as you'll recall, is kind of those underpinnings of what an ideology is, right? The world is broken in a certain way. We're going to fix it. And here's a particular kind of fix. And the fix for this that's going to hold environmentalism, again, as a political ideology, not just as the managerial version of it, is we need to relocate humans in the universe, on the earth, and therefore in our political systems, like how they sit in it. And so there's kind of four key pillars to this kind of environmentalism. One is ecocentrism. It rejects humans as being the center of the universe, right? So if you kind of think about the narrative of most ideologies that we've covered, there's an assumption that humans are different by nature, right? So me as a person, I'm a thinking thing, and that qualifiedly makes me different than, say, a cow or a dolphin or, fill in the blank. Instead, ecocentrism suggests that nature itself has intrinsic value independent of any utility, beauty, or justice to human beings, right? Now, many of them will suggest there is something good to being humans in of that, but again, it has its own value. The second big one is holism. They're going to be drawing both from physics and ecology. They're going to argue that the whole world is an interconnected web rather than atomized individual parts, right? You can't separate the United States out from other things in a truly meaningful way because we are connected together, right? So one of the examples I'll use for students is our use of plastics in the ocean has led to there's microplastics even in places humans have never been before. And so the idea that you can separate these things even intellectually is wrong. So you got ecocentrism, you got holism, and then this is the one where I think it gets the biggest pushback. They're going to argue for limits to growth is the third one. environmentalists are going to reject the core premise of kind of industrial modernity, that perpetual economic growth is either possible or desirable, right? There's limits to the amount of coal, there's limits to the amount of oil, there's limits to the amount that we as humans ought to even exist, right? There could be too many of us, which is an early kind of environmental question. And then finally, they have what's sometimes called kind of a multi-generation social contract, the idea that suggests that our most important social contract is not between the other people who are still living, although there's a sense to that, but rather current peoples have moral obligations to leave a viable ecology, a viable planet for future generations. That's probably the largest imperative of a species, is to make sure that things move forward. And so that's kind of the core pillars of environmentalism is an ideology. And in a sense, it really even doesn't even emerge until industrialization and start moving things forward. And so it's interesting, that you would start off by saying, Justin, it was a little shocking to you. I think that's the same reaction a lot of students. So, as a political scientist, do you include environmentalism as an ideology? No, or do you define it differently? Or I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so I tend to be, I don't do really American political thought as a standalone class. So when I do ideology, it tends to be in the context of political behavior, which is a pretty basic, American left, right. Maybe we'll give a nod to libertarians, here and there. So, but no, I get where you're coming from. I think part of people's hesitation with this is understanding it as its own ideology is maybe twofold. I mean, one is that it is not particularly prevalent as an ideology as compared to a practice. So, there are not a lot of people, and they all own, tea shops or whatever, that really are deep into this. Or pick your favorite hippie profession. I don't, but and I don't mean to be dismissive, but, this is not, in the American context, at least, and maybe in Europe where you have some green parties, they are, you actually have politics organized around this. But I would say in the other part, just, and again, I'm not at all skeptical of this as an ideology, but just, it gives me that pause just as, somebody that's largely steeped in American politics.
And I think especially in the United States, you're right. There's additional pause because we don't have it. You're right. Continue. Yeah,
well, and then it's been essentially grafted onto, if you think about kind of what American ideologies are, which I think is maybe where I'd like to wrap this series up a little bit, is, that they're not pure forms of any of the things that we've talked about. They're kind of amalgamations of things. And to a large extent, I would even argue American ideologies aren't that ideological. I mean, they're just kind of bundle of preferences, on some level, which is an empirical debate a little bit. But, I think the other element of this is just that it's been sort of grafted onto sort of one party and one ideology that is sort of, the Democrats and American liberalism, more or less. And I think we can talk about these, there are some manifestations in interesting ways, I think, in other parts of the political spectrum. But I think that's why it's, I think, so hard for people to think of this as an ideology, because I think we do think of it as a practice. And to the extent that we think of it as an element of politics, it's largely kind of associated with what we consider one ideology. Like, it's just kind of, this is a chunk of, but I don't think that your typical American liberal, they might drive a Prius, they might process an oil company, they're definitely going to recycle, but I'm not sure that they think about environmentalism in ideological ways. I think it's more of a pragmatic, like, it'd be good to not kill sea turtles and things like that. So I think that's my pause, is that, there is kind of a rich intellectual tradition here. And I think there are some people that truly orient themselves in this ways, and maybe more in other places. But I think where it's hard for people to pick up on this a little bit is that we don't talk very much about it in ideological terms. It's more like it would be bad if the global temperature goes up 3 degrees. It's bad that there's lots of nitrates in my drinking water. That's a big one in Iowa. It's bad that topsoil is eroding, things like that, because we won't have as much food, or you'll get cancer, or, what have you. So it tends to be, we talk about it in more pragmatic ways here, which is where I think thinking about it in ideological terms is a little trickier.
Yeah, you're right. Because in the United States, if you take a look at the actual data, the number of individuals in the United States who would qualify as ideologically an environmentalist, I think covers somewhere around less than 1%, right? It's
About the
teeny.
same number that are Jedi.
Yeah, I mean, when we kind of laugh about that, but there is in fact like a real honest Jedi religious movement, and it probably does have adherents in that kind of rate.
Oh,
But
that line did not come out of nowhere. Yeah. So
But you're right when you look, and again, we've been trying to look both, at the United States, but also more broadly and globally as well, kind of placing ourselves in that. It would be correct to say it occupies a larger space than Jedi's when you look at globally, right? There is, in fact, that kind of movement. And I think that's worth pointing out. But yeah, in the United States, we tend to see it as being a add-on to other ideologies.
yes.
It's a Lego piece. It's going to snap on. You don't have, right? You can be a liberal, but I'm not quite an environmentalist. There's that kind of language even on the left about like, what does it mean to be an environmentalist in that kind of sense? And I think that's in part because the variation, we get the compartmentalized version of that in the United States because we're getting it from the United Kingdom. And the UK, where you start with things like questions of population growth, or even more importantly, things like kind of environmental disasters, right? And so one of the early ones of this, 1952, you got the thick yellow cloud that ends up being the Great Smog of London, ends up being this really big moment. For thinking about it in terms of, and kind of, again, this has been kind of a long-standing British thought. Unfortunately, I have to end our ad-supported preview right there. And so if you want to get the rest of this midweek show or any of our midweek shows, you're going to have to become a supporter. Now, it's easy to become a supporter. All you have to do is head down to the show notes and click on support. Or if you prefer to do it in a web browser, head to politicsguys.com/support or head to patreon.com/politicsguys. There's all different kinds of access you get by becoming a supporter. You can have access to our Discord group. You get ads-free versions of all of our shows. You get, of course, these midweek shows. That means you're going to have access to our Constitution shows, the Ideology, Federalist Papers, and so much more. So again, head down to the show notes, click on support, or head your Safari or other browser to politicsguys.com/support or patreon.com/politicsguys. Now, if you're not in a financial position to support the show, reach out to me at mail@politicsguys.com and we can try to get things set up. Also, don't forget you can always reach out with any of your questions or comments at mail@politicsguys.com. And for supporters, you can always reach us on our Discord group. And right now, we have all kinds of discounts on becoming a supporter for a year. You get a free a membership trial for a month. There's just so much more going on. So if you want to hear more of our midweek supporters exclusive show, it's time to head to the show notes. It's time to become a supporter of the show. It's an amazing thing, and we appreciate each and every one of you that makes this possible. This is a small show. It's possible because of you. So please become a supporter today, make the Politics Guys keep happening, and get access to so many cool things. As we close, though, I want to give a special shout out to people who have prioritized the Politics Guys, and they are our executive producers. And they are, and thank you very much to each one of you, Wilmer Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, Jody Marie Miller, and Sean Fugit. We'll be back with a full episode this weekend, but I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,